Carol had this habit of humming while she watered the plants. Not a song you'd recognize, something off-tune, like a melody half-remembered from a commercial or maybe from her childhood. It used to drive me nuts, that humming. Somewhere between a kazoo and a bird having an existential crisis. But the weird thing is, when she stopped doing it, I noticed. That's what kicked this whole mess off. It wasn't like, oh no, my wife stopped humming. She must be having an affair. But you get used to the background noise in your life. When it goes quiet, your brain perks up and starts looking around like a squirrel with caffeine jitters. So, yeah, no humming. And suddenly I'm sitting in my garage at 10 on a Tuesday night wondering why the air feels like it's holding its breath. Carol, for context, is the sort of woman who alphabetizes the spices but doesn't see the irony in forgetting where she parked her car. She works in HR, human resources, which, as far as I can tell, is a job where you speak in soothing tones while slowly eliminating someone's health benefits. She's good at it, too. Charming. Polished. That kind of Midwest warm smile that makes people think she bakes pies when in reality, she just orders them and reheats with the conviction of Martha Stewart. We live in a ranch-style house in Oak Ridge, Missouri. One of those towns where everyone's lawn is either immaculate or an ongoing tragedy. I mow mine religiously. Carol says I do it for the control. She might be right. Or maybe I just don't like dandelions judging me. Anyway, the week everything started unraveling, Carol signed us up for a charity trivia night. This is important. It was hosted at the local library, complete with plastic tablecloths and an MC who looked like he'd been cryogenically frozen in 1993. Our team was called Christopher Columbus. Her idea, of course. Now, Carol is competitive. Like, frighteningly so. We once got disinvited from a couple's board game night because she accused another wife of using dice manipulation. Trivia night, though? That was her Olympics. She showed up with highlighters, printed cheat sheets, totally against the rules, and enough caffeine in her system to read small print from the back row. But that night, during round 3, historical scandals, Carol missed a question. Not just any question. It was about a 1960s senator caught in a love triangle with his secretary and a meatpacking heiress. The kind of thing Carol would usually recite in her sleep. But when they asked it, she just sat there, twirling her pen, looking like someone had unplugged her brain. The rest of the table noticed. One guy tried to joke about it. She laughed too hard, like sitcom laugh track hard. I felt this cold flicker of something in my gut, the same feeling you get when your GPS suddenly says, recalculating. Later, in the car, she blamed it on a migraine. But Carol doesn't get migraines. She gets headaches shaped like specific coworkers. Now I'm not a naturally suspicious man. My idea of intrigue is figuring out if the neighbor 2 doors down is slowly stealing my wheelbarrow. But that night, I got curious. I wasn't trying to catch her in anything. I was trying to explain the humming. Or the lack of it. That's all. A few days passed. She got distant. Not cold. Not hostile. Just like she was living 2 inches above her skin, floating somewhere else. Then came the Wednesday night dinner with her co-worker friends. I was not invited. Supposedly, it was a girls' thing. Which is fine. I like having the house to myself sometimes. I rearranged the garage shelves just to assert dominance over entropy. Carol came back around 10, carrying herself like someone who'd been laughing too hard for too long. She smelled like, well, nothing. Which, ironically, was worse than perfume. She made some comment about the traffic, which didn't make sense because the place she said she'd gone was 8 minutes away. But I didn't push. Not then. The next day, I went to the dry cleaners. It wasn't planned. I just grabbed a few things to drop off. One of them was her blazer from trivia night, the gray one with the sharp shoulders and the little hidden pocket inside. When I took it off the hanger, a note fell out. Just a small, yellow post-it folded in half. It said, "Keep the senator story to yourself next time, winky face." No name. No signature. Just the world's worst emoji. You know those moments when your brain does that slow, clicking sound? Like an old cash register ringing up something expensive? That was me. I stared at that smiley face like it was an alien language. The senator story. The trivia question. Her blank stare. And now this. Here's the part where a normal man might confront his wife immediately. But see, I'm not a normal man. I was raised by a mother who believed in silent observation and very loud passive-aggressive cleaning. I stuffed the note into a copy of Car and Driver and decided to play dumb. Not out of nobility, mind you, just sheer curiosity. If she was keeping secrets, I wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole went. So I waited. Next week, she said she was volunteering at the community center. Carol, who once described volunteering as emotional cardio, now suddenly had a calling? I drove past the community center. No Carol, just a group of teens practicing a confusing form of modern dance. I parked nearby, waited. 2 hours. She never showed. When she came home, she was humming again. That cursed tune. And that's when it clicked. The humming wasn't the background. It was the signal. The signal she was feeling smug, victorious, clever. Let me tell you, there's something profoundly irritating about watching someone hum like a Disney side character after you've been sitting in a pickup for 2 hours next to a man in mesh shorts doing Tai Chi in the grass. So I decided to escalate. Carol's work throws a formal holiday dinner every year, black tie, white tablecloths, and the kind of dessert that comes in tiny cubes. I RSVP'd for both of us, but told her I couldn't make it. Break issues, I said. She left, disappointed in a theatrical kind of way, said she'd miss me. I followed her, in a borrowed suit. Sat 3 tables away. She didn't see me. The lighting helped. That, and the fact that Carol only sees what she expects to see. She was with a group, laughing, mingling. And then, after dessert, she leaned in close to a man with a face that could only be described as board-certified smug. He slipped something into her purse. She smiled, hummed, and that was when I knew. Not the exact details, not who, not how long. But I knew. And oddly enough, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt, finally, an answer. No humming. Then humming. Silence. Then a trivia slip. History, repeated. I didn't storm in. I didn't confront her. I just sat there and watched her glow in a spotlight of her own making, surrounded by people who thought they knew her. And I waited for the right moment. And oh, it came. But I'll save that for next time. When people talk about betrayal, they usually mention things like lipstick on collars or whispers in dark parking lots. But those people clearly never owned a label maker. Carol bought one last year during her organizational enlightenment phase, where she decided that everything in the house needed an identity. Our bathroom drawers, for example, had stickers that read things like Q-tips and regret and mouth stuff. One day I opened the fridge to find the cheese drawer labeled cultured dairy, uncultured husband. I kept it, not because I liked it, because I wanted to remember what a passive-aggressive Wednesday looks like. So when I tell you that it all came crashing down because of a spreadsheet, you'll understand this isn't your usual sob story. It wasn't a text message or a late-night whisper. It was Cell B14, color-coded in bold yellow, with a suspiciously familiar abbreviation. The spreadsheet belonged to Carol, naturally. Her pride and joy. It tracked our expenses, budgets, and, apparently, her social calendar with all the flair of a bored accountant looking for excitement in conditional formatting. I wasn't snooping. That's important. I was looking for the login info to pay our water bill. But Carol, being Carol, had once decided passwords were better stored in an Excel file named grocery list. Right in the middle of her neat tabs, groceries, utilities, gym expenses, I found one titled networking hours. That's the moment I felt the kind of curiosity reserved for scientists discovering glow-in-the-dark frogs. The entries in that tab were precise. Dates, locations, initials, each one labeled NH for networking hours, with color-coded tags. Green for productive, blue for follow-up, yellow for personal development. And there it was, B14. Yellow, labeled JA, at the tail end of last month. Let me clarify something. I am not JA. If there's one thing Carol wouldn't tolerate, it's double initials. She once sent back a wedding invitation because someone's monogram read MM, and she claimed it made the envelope look like it had a stutter. So who was this mysterious JA getting yellow-tagged personal development time? Naturally, I did what any man in my position would do. I closed the file, stared into the middle distance for an hour, then reopened it, and took a picture of the screen with my phone, just in case I needed a souvenir from the moment my marriage switched from sitcom to drama. That weekend, we had brunch with her friends. The same ones who talk about intentional living, while drinking mimosas and pretending they don't absolutely despise each other's Pinterest boards. Carol was especially chirpy. She'd recently become Friendsgiving chair, which, in her world, was one step below the Dalai Lama. Between sips of something garnished with rosemary for no reason, she brought up a name. Jordan Ashcroft's starting a community initiative, she said, like the man's name was dipped in gold. He's recruiting volunteers with management experience. And just like that, B14 had a name. A last name, even. Jordan Ashcroft. Now, this is where most men would hit the panic button. But I've been married to Carol for long enough to know that panic is exactly what she feeds on. Panic means she gets to pivot, manipulate, recenter the narrative, so I end up apologizing for being suspicious in the first place. I once asked her about an Amazon package that arrived with men's socks, and she convinced me they were neutral fit, and I should really unpack my assumptions about gendered textiles. So no, I didn't panic. I volunteered. That's right. I looked Carol dead in the eye and said, "Sounds like a great cause. Maybe I should help out." The sound she made wasn't a no exactly, more like someone trying to swallow a cough in church. She recovered quickly, though, and smiled like she was swallowing a lemon wedge. "That's unexpected," she said. "I contain multitudes," I replied, and that was the end of it. Or so she thought. I applied that evening. The initiative was real, I'll give her that. Jordan Ashcroft was apparently recruiting folks to help develop community dialogue spaces, which is code for folding chairs and coffee in a church basement. 2 days later, I got the welcome email with a meeting invite from Jordan himself. Now let me tell you something about Jordan Ashcroft. The man wears turtlenecks in spring. That should be enough of a personality assessment. But let me continue. He introduced himself by telling us he used to be in branding, which he pronounced like it had a silent D. He referred to himself as a story cultivator, and he clapped after everything he said, which created the illusion that his sentences were constantly giving standing ovations to themselves. Carol wasn't at the meeting, which was suspicious in itself. I stuck around anyway, sat through 2 hours of motivational white noise, and left with a clipboard and a headache. I was the only person in the room wearing denim. Everyone else looked like they were auditioning for a limited series documentary about mindful parenting. The next day, Carol brought up Jordan again. Something about his vision for interactive empathy, which I assumed meant talking at people in very soft tones. "Funny," I said. "He's shorter than I expected." She blinked. "Once. Twice. You met him?" I nodded. "First volunteer meeting." He clapped a lot. There was a twitch at the corner of her mouth. The kind she used to get when someone asked if she'd actually read the book at book club. I let it hang there, unaddressed, like a light bulb buzzing overhead. That week, Carol got busy. Very busy. Her networking hours doubled. The spreadsheet was updated daily, always with new codes, new names. I started decoding them like I was on a spy mission. Only my version of espionage included a lot of Google Calendar cross-referencing and late-night Excel snooping. Eventually, I stumbled onto it. A second spreadsheet, hidden inside a folder titled Q4 Retreat Planning. The tab was labeled Logistics, Private, and there, in plain Arial font, was a note. Not a post-it this time. An actual memo, typed and time-stamped. Confirm availability with JA for coordination meeting Thursday. Discretion essential. I printed it. Not for confrontation. Not for evidence. Just to see how it felt in my hand. The weight of it. Ordinary paper with extraordinary implications. You'd think betrayal would feel like being hit in the chest. But honestly, it felt like reading someone's grocery list and realizing you weren't invited to dinner. So I waited until Thursday. I watched her get ready. She wore the green jacket she once claimed made her feel like a senator's wife. Then she left. I waited exactly 9 minutes, then followed. Not to where she said she was going, but to where the spreadsheet said she'd actually be. And let me tell you what I saw there. Well, Carol never turned left onto Fairview Drive. Not once in 10 years. Fairview was where all the new construction was, and Carol considered exposed wood framing and temporary fencing a personal insult. So when she made that turn Thursday evening, I knew we weren't headed to the place she told me she'd be. And that's when I pulled into a parking lot just shy of the corner, put the truck in park, and watched her sedan disappear around the bend. I didn't follow directly. That would have been too eager, too obvious. Carol had a sixth sense for being watched, like those people who swear they can hear their name whispered in a crowded room. Instead, I took the scenic route, which in this case meant cutting through the side streets and pretending I didn't feel like an amateur detective with a clipboard and a questionable moral compass. She pulled into a parking structure next to the Fairview Civic Hall. I didn't even know the town had a civic hall. Turns out, they do. It's a two-story glass and concrete box that looks like someone lost interest halfway through building a bank and decided to hold public meetings in it instead. Carol entered through the side door with her usual speed walk posture, shoulders back, stride purposeful, like every floor she walks on is interviewing her for a promotion. I waited a few minutes, then casually made my way toward the building, pretending to be lost in a deeply meaningful podcast about zoning ordinances. There was no security, no receptionist, just a list of evening room assignments on a dry erase board in the lobby. A Citizens for Responsible Infrastructure meeting was happening in room 2B. A knitting circle was in 3A, and Community Wellness Visioning Group was in the conference suite. That last one had a smiley face drawn next to it. I don't know if that was meant to encourage attendance or imply they were emotionally fragile. I headed that way. The conference suite was down a short hallway lined with posters about recycling and hand washing, the kind that use more colors than a kindergarten art show and say things like sanitize to socialize, in fonts that were definitely chosen by someone who owns more than one wind chime. Inside the room were 12 people, give or take, all seated around an oblong table with those stackable plastic chairs that squeak every time someone shifts. Carol was front right, not at the head of the table. She'd never be that obvious, but close enough to be mistaken for leadership. And there, directly across from her, sat Jordan Ashcroft, still wearing a turtleneck, despite it being 74 degrees and humid enough to curl rebar. There was a presentation going, something about community cohesion and mural planning. I stood just outside the door pretending to read a brochure about composting. From my position, I had a perfect view of Carol nodding along to whatever nonsense Jordan was spewing about urban warmth aesthetics and facilitating a neighbor-forward culture. And then it happened. Jordan passed her a folder. Not across the table. He got up and walked over. No one else blinked. The folder was blue. Standard issue. But Carol held it like he'd handed her the nuclear codes. She flipped it open, scanned it, and smiled. Not her usual polite smirk. A real smile. The kind she usually reserved for other people's misfortunes. I stepped back from the doorway, leaned against the wall, and pulled out my phone. Not to take pictures. I already had enough of those. I opened the calendar. Thursday night, Wellness Visioning. I created a new event for next week. Phase 2. That weekend, I became an enthusiastic supporter of the initiative. Not publicly. I'm not a lunatic, but in quiet, meticulous ways. I joined the email list under a fake name, Simon Rigsby, a retired dentist with an interest in community gardening. I attended a few events, made polite conversation, chose words carefully. The goal wasn't chaos. The goal was curiosity, and Carol gave me plenty to be curious about. Turns out, the folder Jordan handed her, it was a logistics binder for an overnight leadership retreat happening next month. Not a hotel. Carol would never be that predictable. It was being held at a local college campus, using their empty student housing and conference rooms. Apparently, nothing builds trust like shared bathrooms and fluorescent lighting. I added myself to the volunteer list. Simon Rigsby was accepted without question. The bar for entry was so low, I think they'd have let in a malfunctioning Roomba if it promised to bring snacks. Then came Tuesday night. Carol said she had a late strategy session. I didn't ask questions. I encouraged it. She left wearing her influencer jacket, the one with the structured collar and the tiny hidden pocket that she thinks no one knows about. I waited 5 minutes, then checked her laptop. She'd left her account logged in. Bless her overly confident sense of security. There were no messages from Jordan. Nothing obvious. But in the downloads folder sat a file named avplan_final_FNLV2.pdf. Classic last-minute document naming. Inside were equipment lists, room assignments, and a volunteer roster. And there it was. JA and CR assigned to room 206. Overnight custodians of reflection room materials. I didn't know what reflection room meant, but I was fairly certain it didn't involve mirrors or deep thoughts. At this point, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed. I was intrigued. I felt like a guy who found a secret compartment in a puzzle box he didn't even know he owned. Every detail made the picture clearer, and not once did Carol sense that I was 2 feet behind her, collecting every breadcrumb she'd left with the precision of a man who once reorganized his entire garage by socket size. The following week, I arranged to bump into Jordan at the local office supply store. I was looking at laminators I didn't need. He was buying a laser pointer. We exchanged pleasantries. He didn't recognize me, of course. Why would he? To him, I was just a man standing in the aisle next to the three-hole punches. Hosting a presentation? I asked casually. He chuckled. Always something going on. I nodded. Civic life never sleeps. That got a laugh. He asked if I was involved with the initiative. I told him no, but I'd heard great things. Mentioned Carol by name. Watched his face closely. There it was, the half-second pause, the micro-expression people make when their private life gets mentioned by a stranger. Carol's a star, he said, recovering. We're lucky to have her. I smiled and said nothing. By the time I got home, Carol was already there, on the couch, watching a documentary about cults. She had the remote in one hand and her phone in the other. When I sat down beside her, she looked up and said, "You'd hate this. It's all interviews and no action." I nodded. Sounds like leadership training. She laughed and turned back to the screen. That night, while she slept, I updated my own spreadsheet. Added new entries. Timestamps. Cross-references. Not because I needed proof. Not anymore. I just wanted to be able to look back someday and remember exactly how efficient the process had been. Next week, she'd be heading to that retreat. With Jordan. Room 206. Reflection materials. And I'd be there too. Under a different name. Wearing a volunteer badge. Ready for the final piece of the puzzle. College campuses are strange when they're out of season. No students, no noise, just rows of empty parking spaces and vending machines blinking in lonely rhythm. The campus chosen for the retreat looked like it had stopped caring sometime around 2003. Half the light fixtures flickered, and the welcome sign in the lobby still said, "Go Wildcats." Even though, based on the event schedule, the only wild thing expected that weekend was an optional 6 a.m. Tai Chi session hosted by someone named Brenda. I arrived early. Carol didn't see me. That's because I wasn't supposed to exist, at least not to her. On paper, I was Louis Brandt, a fictional retired guidance counselor with a bad knee and an excellent record of stapler safety presentations. My badge said Volunteer, Logistics Oversight. My shirt said, I iron things for events. Nobody questioned me. Probably because I used phrases like asset map and cross-departmental communication with enough confidence to imply I owned at least one binder full of acronyms. Carol showed up 30 minutes later, right on schedule, dressed like she was about to solve local government inefficiencies before lunch. Jordan arrived right behind her. They barely made eye contact in the lobby, amateurs. They were clearly doing the pretend we're not arriving together, but totally our routine. A classic. I noted it with the same detachment one might reserve for a poorly executed magic trick. Over the course of the day, I remained invisible. That's one of my better skills, actually. I can vanish in plain sight if the lighting is bad, and I keep moving with enough purpose. I helped set up easels, passed out name tags, directed people to breakout sessions with the sort of bland cheerfulness you'd expect from a man who once alphabetized his DVD collection out of boredom. The real action didn't start until the evening. After dinner, which I did not attend because I had logistics paperwork to do. Translation, standing in the hallway pretending to look busy with a clipboard I stole from the janitor's closet. Carol and Jordan were assigned to room 206, the infamous reflection room. It was just a regular classroom someone had tried to make profound by putting a rug in the middle and a stack of folding chairs around the perimeter. There were post-it notes, markers, and a Bluetooth speaker playing ambient sounds that I'm fairly sure were just repackaged dishwasher recordings. They entered together, talking low. She set her tote bag on a chair. He carried a laptop and a manila envelope. I didn't enter the room. I didn't need to. I had a better plan. Back during setup, I'd installed the whiteboard. Or, more accurately, I replaced the original one with a magnetic board from a maintenance closet. I also attached a small device, legal, harmless, extremely boring to most people, that records short bursts of audio for transcription purposes. It's marketed to teachers. I bought it with a discount code labeled BACKTOSCHOL 15. While Carol and Jordan began setting up the reflection materials, I returned to my post at the event check-in desk. Not a soul came by. Not a whisper of interest. Everyone else was attending a session titled Collective Listening, Building Empathy in Multidirectional Teams, which I assumed was an extended group sigh with intermittent nodding. At exactly 8:43 p.m., the device in room 206 kicked on. I wouldn't get the audio until later, of course, but I was less interested in hearing it than confirming it existed. That was the point now. It wasn't about betrayal anymore. That part was clear, solved, checked off. It was about the shape of it, the structure, the choreography. Around 9:20, Carol and Jordan emerged from room 206. She looked freshly calibrated, like someone who had just filed something in the correct folder. He looked smug in the way men look when they've successfully explained a metaphor no one asked for. They went their separate ways. I returned to the room. Everything looked normal. A few chairs askew. Markers capped. The rug slightly crooked, which I'm assuming was the result of either impromptu discussion or someone deciding it was a tripping hazard. I retrieved the device, tucked it into my clipboard slot, and exited quietly. Back in my assigned dorm room, which smelled faintly of old textbooks and freshman regret, I plugged in the device. The recording began mid-sentence, as expected. Not too much, but enough to keep it discreet, Carol said. Jordan's voice followed, nasal and overconfident. Well, the roster's vague. Nobody's tracking room pairings. A pause. Paper rustling. Carol again. Did you make sure the doc doesn't link us directly? Of course. All the digital stuff is through my work account. You're just a consultant. I hit pause. It was nothing dramatic. No poetry. No declarations. Just the kind of dry, logistical collusion that sounded like two coworkers planning an off-the-books budget adjustment. Only in this case, the budget was my marriage, and the adjustment involved lies delivered through color-coded spreadsheets and moderately priced tote bags. The next morning, I packed up early. There was no grand confrontation. No righteous scene in the hallway. I checked out under the name Louis Brandt, turned in my badge, and left with a half-full coffee cup and a head full of confirmed suspicions. Carol didn't see me go. When I got home, I cleaned out the junk drawer. That was step one. Not symbolic. Literal. I couldn't stand the idea of living with a drawer full of expired batteries and rubber bands with no job. Carol always said the drawer was controlled chaos, which was her way of pretending she didn't just shove stuff in it until it stopped closing properly. Step 2. I printed out a copy of the transcript. Step 3. I mailed it to her, in an envelope with a sticky note that said, "You should relabel your spreadsheet tabs. Reflection is misleading." Then I waited. She didn't call, didn't text. She came home as usual, 2 days later, walked in like nothing had changed. That's how she operated. Never first to speak. Always waiting for the other person to start the fire so she could claim to be the one putting it out. I didn't start the fire. I handed her the water bucket and walked away. But I'll get to that next. Carol entered the house like someone trying to return to a room without acknowledging they ever left it. She placed her keys in the little ceramic dish she insisted we keep by the door for aesthetic consistency, then pulled out her phone, stared at it like it owed her money, and made her way to the living room. She sat on the edge of the couch cushion she always pretended was more comfortable than it was and crossed her legs with a little too much ceremony. She didn't look at me. Not right away. The transcript envelope sat on the coffee table. The post-it I'd stuck to it was still attached, still upright, still perfectly capable of reminding her that I hadn't just guessed, speculated, or overreacted. I had documentation. Dated. Edited for clarity. Formatted in 11-point calibri with timestamps. The kind of thing you could present in a budget meeting if the budget meeting was about whether your marriage still qualified as a joint venture. She stared at it, then at me, then back at it. She didn't ask what it was. That would have been too easy. Instead, she chose her opening move like someone selecting the cleanest fork in a drawer that had already been through a flood. "Did you make this yourself?" "Just the formatting," I said. "The content is yours. You should get co-author credit." Carol leaned back against the cushion and exhaled. Not dramatically, just enough to signal that she was preparing for a conversation she hadn't wanted to schedule. It was, as far as I could tell, the first time she hadn't tried to reshape reality into something more flattering to her calendar. "So what now?" she asked. I said. "We've reached this so what now phase. Right on schedule." Silence. You'd think this would be the moment she'd start crying, or confess, or maybe claim some deep internal struggle that forced her to bond with Jordan over their shared passion for beige community initiatives. But Carol didn't traffic in emotion unless she'd prepared a script and had a handout to go with it. So instead, she just asked the same question again, but slower. "What do you want to happen?" I shrugged. "Oh, I already made my decision. I just wanted to see if you'd be honest once in your life without being prompted by a spreadsheet error." Her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost not. This is petty, she said. No, I corrected. Petty would have been forwarding this to your boss and suggesting an ethics review. This is curated restraint. Carol leaned forward and folded her hands like she was about to moderate a panel on conflict resolution. If this is your way of punishing me, fine. But let's skip the dramatic build-up. Just say what you want. Okay, I said. I want to opt out. She blinked. Opt out. From the project. The initiative. This marriage. The whole Carol experience. I've sat through enough of the seminar to know the brochure doesn't match the programming. You're being ridiculous. You're right, I nodded. Ridiculous is sticking around just to see if you and Jordan make it to Phase 4. Interpersonal synergy. I have better hobbies. I can't believe you're throwing away 10 years over one misstep. One misstep, I repeated. Interesting phrasing. Like you tripped into room 206. Carol straightened. I'm not going to fight with you. Of course not, I said. You don't argue. You reframe. I made a mistake. No, I said. You made a choice. Mistakes happen when you drop your phone or delete a file. What you did required scheduling and coordination. She stood up, walked toward the kitchen, then stopped halfway like she wasn't sure if she wanted water or an escape route. She looked tired. Not guilty. Not apologetic. Just tired. Like she'd been holding her breath through a meeting that went off the rails. You're blowing this out of proportion. Proportion? I asked. Let me show you something. I stood up, grabbed the binder I'd put together. Yes, a binder. Nothing says closure like dividers. I handed it to her and sat back down. She opened it. Inside were the event flyers, the email logs, the room assignment chart, and yes, her precious networking hours spreadsheet, now annotated with footnotes and summary commentary. I even added a pie chart, because I knew she'd respect the effort. She flipped through it silently. This is obsessive, she said finally. No, I replied. This is comprehensive. You should appreciate the detail. I learned it from you. Carol closed the binder, stared at it like it had personally offended her, then set it back on the table. Are you going to tell people? Nope, I said. Not unless you hand me a reason. This isn't revenge, Carol. It's release. She nodded once, slowly. And what about the house? I'm leaving. You can keep it. I'm not interested in splitting bricks with you. I've already packed. Just give me till tomorrow morning. And then what? Then you get to run the rest of your life like a committee. Jordan can be your vice chair. That one stung. I saw it. A flicker of something she couldn't control fast enough to hide. You don't have to do this, she said. We could talk about it. We could restructure. There it was. The language of her people. Restructure. Like this was a failing department instead of a marriage. I've seen your structure, I said. It leaks. She didn't reply. We sat in silence for a while. I didn't need to say anything else. She knew what was coming. She probably calculated the probability of this outcome weeks ago and ran 5 simulations of how to respond. But here's the thing. None of those simulations accounted for me deciding to disengage completely. Carol could prepare for conflict. She couldn't prepare for disinterest. When I stood up to leave the room, she didn't stop me. Just sat there next to the binder and the envelope and the neatly stacked tower of her own creation. Tomorrow, I'd be gone. But don't worry. The conclusion's coming. And it's got one last surprise. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, which was both unusual and suspicious. My body generally considers anything before 7:15 a.m. personal attack. But there I was, sitting upright at 6:02, fully alert, like I'd been summoned by the gods of unfinished paperwork and unreturned house keys. I didn't make a show of leaving. That wouldn't have fit the tone of the thing. No slamming drawers, no box-tossing theatrics, no muttered monologues. I moved through the house like I was transferring out of a department where the manager had already started interviewing for my replacement. The guest room, which Carol had referred to as the seasonal overflow zone, had become my command center over the past few weeks. Everything I needed was already stacked in tidy rows, labeled, sorted, sealed. I didn't leave anything behind that wasn't irrelevant. That included 3 sweaters I never liked and the live, laugh, love sign she bought during her minimalist phase. That thing stared at me for 5 years like it was daring me to leave in the middle of a sentence. Carol didn't wake up. Or maybe she did and decided her role in this particular production was to remain offstage. Fitting. Her most consistent quality had always been timing. Right moment, right words, wrong context. At 7-Eleven, I placed my house key on the kitchen counter. Next to it was the binder. I'd added one more page. Not a letter, not a note, just a printed quote from a leadership training seminar I once sat through because she needed a ride and offered free coffee as incentive. Clear communication eliminates the need for repeated justification. I figured it was poetic enough to register, but dry enough to sting. Then I left. No traffic, which felt suspiciously like the universe giving me a pity escort out of town. I drove to my brother's place 3 towns over, where I'd already arranged a temporary stay. He'd cleared out his old office for me and stocked the mini fridge with sodas he assumed I still drank. I didn't, but I appreciated the effort. Compared to Carol's precision, the randomness of someone else trying to help without a spreadsheet was oddly refreshing. The first week felt strange in the same way wearing someone else's glasses feels strange. Everything was the right shape, but nothing was quite in focus. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Not because I was ashamed, but because explaining it required a level of detail most people aren't prepared to process without snacks. Carol didn't reach out, which was exactly the sort of silence she specialized in. 2 weeks later, I got a piece of mail. Handwritten envelope. Return address. The house. My former house. Her house now. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No signature. It said, "You left your backup charger and a USB stick. Should I toss them?" That was it. No mention of anything else. No mention of the binder, the transcript, the list of spreadsheet tabs she never renamed. Just the charger. Just the stick. I wrote back. Toss the charger. Keep the USB. You'll want it when Jordan starts thinking you're inefficient. I didn't send it. There was no need. Instead, I moved on with the surprising efficiency of someone who had once been forced to co-manage a monthly budget with a woman who color-coded toothpaste purchases. I got my own place. Small. Clean. No plants with names. No mugs labeled hers. I bought a coffee table from a man named Arnold who had no interest in bargaining and spoke exclusively in single syllables. It was great. For the first time in a decade, my days didn't include performance reviews in the form of passive-aggressive calendar invites. I started sleeping better. I rewatched shows I actually liked instead of shows that helped with perspective. I reconnected with old friends. Some asked questions. Most didn't. The ones who mattered had already known something was off. They just hadn't said anything because they figured I'd find out the way most of us do, slowly, with a side of denial. Months passed. Then, in the spring, I ran into her. Grocery store. She was standing in front of the greeting cards, holding one with a bear wearing a lab coat. I assumed it was for someone's retirement or maybe a get-well card for someone with a sense of humor that matched her taste in font-heavy wall decor. She looked the same. Polished. Calculated. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Not in surprise, but in the way someone blinks when they realize they left the oven on. We exchanged pleasantries. "How's everything?" she asked, because that's what people say when what they mean is, "Have you told anyone?" "Quiet," I said. "Unstructured. Pretty great." She smiled like someone trying out an expression she hadn't used in a while. "That's good." She didn't ask where I lived or if I was seeing anyone. I didn't ask about Jordan or the reflection room. We both knew those topics were dead ends, and neither of us was the type to linger in graveyards. When we parted, she said, "Take care, Joshua." Not Josh. Joshua. Professional to the end. And that was it. That was the last conversation I ever had with Carol. Some people expect a dramatic ending. A breakdown. A betrayal countered with another betrayal. A tearful confession on a rainy day. But the truth is, most endings are just meetings that stop getting scheduled. And mine? Well, it concluded exactly how it should have. With clean formatting, no unresolved comments, and every agenda item crossed off. Meeting adjourned. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel